Welcome to the DRF Sports Podcast, brought to you by DRF Sports. America's most trusted name in horse racing is now providing sports bettors with exclusive data, analytics, previews, videos, and expert picks on all major sports. Bet smarter and have more fun doing it. It's the DRF Sports Podcast, and now your host, Sheldon Alexander. Ready, set, bet.
This is the DRF Sports Podcast, episode 89. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Sheldon Alexander, with a special reminder to make sure that you like and subscribe to our YouTube page so that you never miss any of our expert betting insights. And betting insights is what we were giving you. The NBA Finals is over. The Warriors are champions, and thus wrapping up an epic season of picks for me here on the DRF Sports Podcast. I got off the Celtics train, told you to hit up the Warriors for that game 6 because the Celtics were done. That finishes up my record here at a 40-31 record against the spread in the play-in/playoffs for a 56% record. And also 52-35-1 against the spread for my NBA picks overall since we switched the pod from giving picks in the NFL post-Super Bowl. We talked NBA. I was here clicking at 59%. 59. What more do you want, really, right? More on that in a sec. But first, hey, Iowa, DRF Sportsbook is sending all parlays to the moon. Start cashing in with DRF Sportsbook's 22% profit boost for all MLB, NBA, or NHL parlays. The MLB season is here, and along with the NBA playoffs and the NHL Stanley Cup playoffs, so it's time to celebrate, and we want to boost your profits. So head over to the DRF Sportsbook now and start betting. Must be physically present in Iowa to wager. So we'll recap the NBA Finals while also touching on the U.S. Open and the Stanley Cup Finals. All that and more right here. DRF Sports Podcast. Luckily for y'all, that starts right about now. Well, it's a lovely Monday morning. Draymond Green is still talking a lot of smack after the Warriors win the chip. Tampa Bay Lightning are in some trouble in the Stanley Cup Final. And someone won the U.S. Open, but I have no idea who because I didn't watch a second. But I know this man did, and he's here to tell us all about it. Mr. Matt Russell, how you doing, my dude?
I'm good, man. I'm on holidays right now, and honestly, it's the first paid time off that I've had in 3 years.
Okay.
Because when you work for yourself for a chunk of time there from 2019 through 2021, betting professionally, you are sort of obviously responsible for making your own money. and vacations are sort of hard to come by. Obviously take a lot of time off in the summer just based on the sports schedule or whatnot. But then even getting into media and doing the podcast and freelance writing for the Action Network and a couple other spots, again, you get paid for play, right? And so I actually have paid time off now, and this is outstanding. But I wouldn't dare miss out on getting to have a conversation with you. And because the weekend was so good, right? U.S. Open, you were super locked in, as you mentioned.
Yes.
You probably would have been super locked in if you had taken some of our advice in the U.S. Open podcast, or if you'd read my stuff, because we got to a point over this weekend where we had Zalatoris, which we talked about in the podcast last week, and then Scheffler and Fitzpatrick. We talk about how, adding to your portfolio live in major championship golf, right? You get a better idea after the first and second rounds of who's playing well, utilizing the metrics, if you will, to sort of figure out, okay, who's playing well, who can improve upon their score relative to how well they're playing. So I wrote on Friday about 3 golfers. One was Brooks Koepka. He was 40-1. We took a shot on that. But the other 2 were Scotty Scheffler at 7-1 and Matthew Fitzpatrick at 20-1. And so it comes down to the wire there. And of course, we have Zalatoris from earlier on in the week. He talked about how he and Shane Lowry were sort of my 2 picks before the tournament started to maybe grab the price while the getting was good there, around 30 to 35-1. And the cool thing about being way wrong on a guy like Shane Lowry, we talk about Finau, Homa, some of these other guys, is if you are really right about one guy like Fitzpatrick or, Zalatoris, you win a lot more right? You win a lot more than you lose on some of those others. And that's obviously the draw to betting on golf. And so we come down to the wire there where it's Fitzpatrick, it's Scheffler, it's Zalatoris for really pretty much the entire day. I would say at least kind of the last like 12 holes. And it was just sort of like, all right, I'll sit here and I'll just wait to see how much I'm going to win. But in true Matt Russell fashion, I was probably a little too heavy on Zalatoris. It would have been another $1,000 on Zalatoris if he ends up winning. He burns the edge and he comes up a couple, revolutions short down the stretch on some putts. If he had just hit one of them, we would have had a playoff, which would have been super exciting. But either way, we cash with Fitzpatrick at 20-1. We're certainly not going to complain about that. Is that any good? I would say it is. So nice to kind of go out on this U.S. Open with a big winner there. And honestly, sometimes it is that easy. We talk about like the narrative street, right? Narrative street of him winning the U.S. Amateur at Brookline. And you're like, oh, yeah, he's got to contend because he won a tournament there 9 years ago, right? And it's the first thing that you sort of go, oh, come on, like it can't be that easy. Like, what a lame way to sort of handicap something. But, he's also right at the top of all of these statistical categories. And he's, gradually increased his distance so that now a guy who is really good in the short game and really good in approach shots with his irons is now competing in driving distance as well, even though he doesn't look like he'd be able to hit the ball as far as he does. And so when there's some, smoke and there's fire type of situation, right? So the smoke is his comfortability at Brookline and the fire is his stats. And you put those all together. Now you sit back on Sunday night, Monday morning, and you're going like, yeah, makes a ton of sense that this guy would win if, he's driving the ball like a Dustin Johnson, right? He's playing with him in those first couple rounds, driving it right where Dustin was driving it for a lot of that. So, whether you just went down narrative street with the U.S. Amateur from 9 years ago, or whether you actually dug into the numbers, I think a lot of people won with Matthew Fitzpatrick this week. And you know what? More power to everybody. Great time. Yes. Great time had by all.
Yes, great time had by all there. Great time had by all as the NBA Finals is also over. And man, Steph Curry winning Finals MVP after a 103-90 victory in Game 6. And when we look back at that series, the Warriors win, obviously, 4-2. We discussed, obviously, the whole way through. We focused in on the NBA towards the end of, following the NFL. We focused in a lot and talked about the NBA. And as we wrap things up here, going into said NBA Finals, you were on the Celtics, you were on the Warriors, pardon me. I was on the Celtics, what I meant to say. I was on Celtics in 6, and obviously that did not happen. And we come into Game 6, and it was one of those things where you looked at the series and just thought, yeah, it was over. Like you could just tell after the Celtics blew games 3 and 4, it's just, it wasn't going their way at all. And that's a beauty sometimes to me as an NBA fan and watching the NBA and understanding it. Like it's sometimes just matchups. And sometimes once a team figures it out, it's a wrap. Able to cash out on a Game 6 win with the Warriors as they were +4. I think the Warriors were +4 heading into that Game 6. So good to end the season on a high note for me here. Getting that one victory, I guess. 40-31 against the spread in the play-in/playoffs to click at 56%. Overall in our NBA picks, 52-35-1 against the spread to hit us at 59% overall.
Outrageous.
NBA picks since we switched over from the NFL. And it was just a lot of fun to discuss the NBA. And the reason for me why I enjoy the NBA and just the way that it moves, to me, it's such a sport where you can come in at the beginning, you can have your pick, but then you watch the games, and even within the game, like the game within the game, the live betting opportunities for you to win are so interesting because you can just watch and certain things like the Warriors third quarter runs, you watch things like that, you see that coming. Obviously, we know that the trash talk is what I love about the NBA so much. And, somehow Ja Morant is out here
Right.
talking hella greasy somehow. And
He's
it's like,
back. It's like,
yeah, it's
didn't
like,
we dispose of you like 3 weeks ago? Like, how are you
yeah,
back
it's
in chat?
so incredible, but that's what makes the NBA what it is. But I want to turn this over to you and just sort of ask, like, how are you feeling after that NBA Finals, Steph winning Finals MVP, and the Warriors, I guess, coronation of said dynasty?
Yeah, it's it's funny, right? So like they win the series, I win the bets on the series price, and like as you mentioned, right? Like I'll let's just hop on the high horse here for a second here, right? Like you end up going like 56% in the playoffs and 59% overall, like against the spread. Like what else would we possibly want from you in that circumstance, right? So like you're absolutely killing it, forcing yourself to basically pick every single game just to have a side and to sort of tell people, okay, like this is what I think on this side. And like that's not even being sort of discriminatory within to like which games you want to pick. You are picking every single game and you're going
whenever we had the pod.
I should say, yes, right, because obviously there was gaps. But like yeah, anytime we had the pod and there was a scheduled game, like you make a pick and you go 56%. And so like, yeah, I win the series and my bets on that, but like that's just one bet. And the thing that I think is really cool is that you and I can come into this series and sort of talk about it all throughout and disagree about kind of the big picture on like who is going to win this series for those, first few games. And then you and I can sit down and sort of crunch out the props and how these games are sort of going to play out. And so you end up sort of flipping at the end there. And I was sort of like, oh no, like I always sort of don't want anybody to flip because you went with the Warriors in game 6. Cause I'm like, oh my God, what if the Celtics win and they cover? And like, now, you know what I mean? Now he's 2-3 on Celtics bets, but now he's 0-1 on fading the Celtics. And that's how you get yourself into like a 2-4, 2-5 type series where you get behind the 8 ball. But you were right. And I was like, I don't know if I would even bet on this. The Warriors, like the Celtics do what they do, right? They, when their back is against the wall, like that's when they sort of come out. But it's like, you don't have to bet it in my case, right? I didn't force myself to make any of these bets. But the point is we can go and we sit down and we sort of talk that stuff out. And like, maybe there isn't a side, or maybe, like you said, like you grab the Warriors at the end there and you end up finishing 3-3 on the series. And it's like, okay, not a big deal at all, right? Like you drop like 0.3 units on, from a game to game standpoint, and you had the underdog to start the series. So like you go down, 1.3 units for a series when you came into that series being, hitting at like a 58% clip for the playoffs. And it's like, okay, so you gave back a little bit towards the end. Then on the flip side, like I wasn't having as good as I wasn't hitting 58% against the spread coming into this series. Like I was hovering around slightly above 50%. Like I was basically neutral from a betting standpoint. But then we sit down, again, get the series price. But again, that's just one bet. But we sit down, we figure this out and we go, okay, like, how do we bet this? Right. And so I end up bouncing back with the Warriors in game 2, right? Grab the spread there. And then we start digging into the shot quality stuff. And of course, shout out to our guy, Simon Gersberg, who I believe called Warriors in 6, even though he was like, I think the shot quality is actually going to be in the Celtics' favor. But we look at the shot quality and we go, okay, like this is shaping up to be, a lot of unders here. So I ended up cashing like, 1 out of the 2 in the money line when the Warriors went to Boston, and then the under in game 5, the under in game 6. And then you and I just sit down again, whenever we had a game right before this podcast, and we look at the props, and those end up going 11-2, including a sweep in the last game of 4-0. Now, part of it is like, me being on this wagon of like Jaylen Brown turnover fest, right? Like he's cashing over 2.5 turnovers by like halftime in some of these games. So sometimes it's like being so present in these series that you pick out something that not everybody else is doing, right? And like, we talked about it with like Draymond assists, and when they sort of changed the accounting, if you will, on Draymond assists, but it's like, it's not like the Jaylen Brown turnover market is getting pummeled by people and they have to adjust it the way they adjusted Steph Curry threes, because there's, that's a headliner type prop. Whereas the Jaylen Brown over turnovers, like we probably could have kept hitting that for, another full series after this one, because it's not like the money was pouring in on Jaylen Brown over 2.5 turnovers. But you and I were able to, focus on that, grab that. And so we're hitting unders, we're hitting Jaylen Brown over turnovers. We were bopping back and forth on Klay Thompson, right? Hit the over, in the previous game, the under in game 6. And so And then of course the Draymond over assists, he ends up actually getting over 6.5 instead of getting that last assist rescinded. He actually had 8. So we were at least comfortable there that we weren't going to have some sort of disaster at the end. But the point is like you and I can disagree about who we think is going to win the series. And honestly, by the time we got through game 4, I was like, yeah, I think the Celtics theoretically have better players and probably are the quote unquote better team if you just sort of sum of the parts type of deal, right? But the whole point the whole way was like, no, man, like the Celtics show us who they are, and they are going to kick this away, and they're going to try to kick this away. And like Miami didn't have the weapons to be able to take it from them, and the Warriors did. And even the Bucks, obviously without Middleton, didn't have the weapons to take it from them, and the Warriors did. And that was sort of part of the handicap that is less about numbers and metrics and shot quality and stuff, and more about just being like, okay, we've been locked in for 6 weeks on this NBA playoffs. And like these teams are showing you what they are willing to do, right? And what they're capable of doing. And the Warriors were that team that could be like, okay, if you're going to make some mistakes here, like that's what we're going to do. We're going to take advantage of it. And like, yeah, Clay might not be looking great, and Draymond might have some catastrophe games, and we might not be super sure about what we're going to get from Jordan Poole, but like somehow it's going to work out. And sometimes it's going to be Steph Curry just racking up points, and sometimes the other guys are going to chip in, and Andrew Wiggins is going to have this star turn. And like all of that stuff is sort of unpredictable, but it's also predictable because it's how they played throughout the playoffs. And like kudos to the Celtics for getting as far as they did, sort of messing around, right? Playing around. But like the Warriors are that team that are going to take advantage of that. And I know like we don't like, it's funny, like everybody sort of soured on the Warriors and they're like bummed out about Draymond and Steve Kerr and like this, that, or whatever. And it's like, yeah, but they're just really good. They're just really good, and they just know how to win basketball games. And it's like you see all of these teams in all of these sports who just know how to win. And I just don't think the Celtics are there. And listen, we can blame whoever we want to blame, Jason Tatum. And, obviously I've been mocking a little bit Jaylen Brown and his inability to dribble 3 times, but like he was better than Jason Tatum in this series, right? And then what are you going to just rely on Al Horford every game to put up 25 points? Like that doesn't seem all that likely. And then looking back on it, I also kind of go, okay, the Celtics won 2 games. And if I'm going to be really, really sort of stingy about this, like the Celtics shot 7 of 8 threes in the fourth quarter after being down 12 in that first game against the Warriors. And then obviously came out in game 3 in that first quarter and like built an 18-point lead. And you go, honestly, if you take away those 2 quarters, where would the Celtics potentially have been left at? Right. And I know that's sort of easy to sort of cherry pick and that sort of thing, but like they have to do better on 22 other quarters in this series, like those 2 quarters that saved the day for them. I mean, it was like a 25-point swing in that fourth quarter in game 1. And like I said, like an 18-point jump out in that first game in Boston, even though they blew the lead and obviously sort of needed a better fourth quarter. Like if without those 2 quarters, like we might've been talking about this being like a relatively comfortable victory for the Warriors. And like, again, that's with a team that we think had more pieces than the Warriors did. So like, I think there's an introspection type thing with Boston. This isn't like, oh, they've got to make some massive wholesale changes there. But I think Jason Tatum certainly has to look himself in the mirror. But if I'm Boston, like I'm pretty excited about Robert Williams going into next year, because that guy showed up big time, I thought, given the fact that he was, injured throughout the playoffs and you didn't know one day or another whether he was actually going to play. So, again, like we can look forward to next season and sort of say like, okay, are both these teams going to be back? And we can look at, I'm happy to look at the futures market with you as we look, as we shift from last year to this coming year. But I don't see why both these teams could be back next year.
I actually wholeheartedly disagree and don't think either team will be back next year. But that's
I'm not saying they are, they're not. I'm just saying like it's within the realm of possibility, as in like it's not like this was a last stand for either of these teams. And like specifically Boston, it wasn't like, oh man, like this is your one chance. Now people will say like, and I would say like, hey, listen, if there was one team I was going to pick right this second for the East next year, it would be the Milwaukee Bucks, because the easy narrative there is like, oh, they're going to get Chris Middleton back. And like, if they played this series again with Boston, they would win that series and blah, 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 blah. Right. Like that's a different conversation than just like wholeheartedly rejecting the idea that Boston, because honestly, I think, getting some ball handling for Boston, which is like, point guards, relative to other positions, pretty much grow on trees, right? And so if you can make some moves with regards to that, get a healthier Robert Williams, and then look around at some of these other role players, the Grant Williamses and such, and just go and like, listen, I don't think Horford's done by any stretch of the imagination. And it's like, if you just ask a little bit less from everybody around because you make one, different type of a decision. And listen, I think Brad Stevens can do that, right? And so I just go like, this isn't the best version of the Celtics, so why would I write them off sort of going forward? And like, they are, plus 600 to win the title next year. The Bucks are plus 750. I would certainly prefer the Bucks at plus 750, but like, there's a reason these two teams are the top two choices going into next year, or at least coming off of this year. Now, obviously, that's a relatively short-sighted view considering they were both in the finals. But the market say what the markets say at this point, right?
Totally, yeah. And I think the Celtics, they are just tweaks away from being able to quote unquote fix it. And I think needing some help on the perimeter, just in terms of like shot creation, a point guard would definitely help. And I think, one big thing is that the way that they turned over the roster in terms of handing over the keys of the quote unquote point guard role to Marcus Smart, I think it was a stopgap and it worked. Obviously, like they got to the NBA finals and it was a good fix. And it's just what the NBA comes down to all the time. It's matchups, right? And like, we'll never be able to fully comprehend that, because what ends up happening is, a team won and then people throw out random shit to make it like, oh, well, they only won because of this. And I always use the Raptors as the example, right? Because it's always asterisk, because this person got hurt, that person got hurt. And it's like, that happens in every single playoffs, right? And it's like, no one's going to remember the Warriors beat Jokic by himself, Ja getting hurt in that series, when really like Memphis had them on the ropes, right? Like they took them 2-6 without Ja Morant. No one's going to remember Luka by himself. No one's going to remember the Suns choking miserably in Game 7 to Luka Doncic and the Mavs. And what happens if the Suns play the Warriors? We don't know. Who knows? No one's even going to remember the Celtics being up 2-1 and then blowing back-to-back fourth quarter leads. And that just happened last week. So it's why I always say, right? Like, I just laugh at the asterisk talk, because you take the rings when you can. And so even as corny as I think the Golden State Warriors are and always have been, hashtag holy cannoli, or whatever the hell Klay Thompson was talking about. Listen, they won the chip. You win the ring that's in front of you. Steph Curry, I think, put in like mega work, which was dope to see and dope to watch just as a fan of the game. And I like the fact, despite the fact that I was on the Celtics, I like the fact that the style of play of the Golden State Warriors won. And I don't mean the wild 3-point shooting. I mean the team basketball, the passing the ball around, the ability that they were able to adjust and not just live and die by the three. They were able to, they're the ones that made an adjustment in their starting lineup and started Otto Porter instead of Looney, just to like match down with the Celtics. I didn't see the Celtics make an adjustment throughout that series to say, hey, we're going to try to match up better against the Golden State Warriors. Like, that never happened. So that whole side of it comes back to what you're saying, right? The narratives of just how the NBA playoffs roll out. And plus you're running into a team that's just been there before, been there, done that, understand how to close out games, understand the hierarchy, right? Because again, I mean, I don't know what happened to Jason. Well, I shouldn't say that. I know what happened to Jason Tatum. We talked about it in like Game 4. He's tired. Right. Simmons threw out the stat, and I don't know if it's true. He said he played 500 more minutes than anyone else in the NBA this season. That's insane. Right. Yeah. But we talked about it. You could tell when you're shooting air balls in the fourth quarter of these games, you're tired. You're running on fumes. And to me, that's like an unacceptable thing to say about someone who's 24. Like, yo, you can't wear down. But it's also what happens in this modern NBA where we devalue the regular season. Right. When the regular season should be getting you ready for the playoffs, because the rest can't be resting and then you're tired in the NBA finals. That's not how this works. It's conditioning. It's preparing your body for the rigors of what the NBA finals should be. So again, I'll get off the high horse and just say that it was a good NBA finals. I was entertained by it. I know people are ripping the playoffs as a whole because of all of the blowouts and all that fun stuff. And maybe like that doesn't affect us as much because it's still Like we're looking at a lot of it through the gambling lens. So there's a winner and a loser. Either way you go, no matter what the final score is, like blowout or not, entertained or not. I was entertained. So overall, I just think that, when I look back at this series, it's cool to see the coronation of Steph Curry and having his moment. I will say he's still not better than LeBron. He's still not better than Kobe, but that's cool. Like that's the top tier of like ever. Right.
Sure.
Like,
yeah.
I just love the NBA so much. And that was so much fun to do that and talk about the NBA with you each and every week, twice a week. And futures.
Yeah. So who do you, again, we talk about like those two teams being the favorites again, everybody, first, a couple of things. One, people just like what they've most recently seen. And two, this should be a disclaimer, like under no circumstance should you be betting. I shouldn't say under no circumstances, under very few circumstances should you ever be betting the NBA champion a full year before it happens. But like from a, expectation of what's going to happen in the summer and going into next season, like, yeah, okay. So Boston and the Warriors are the, top two choices here. And then, I don't know which way you want to start, but like, I'm just looking at the West here and it's like the second choice is the Clippers. The third choice is the Suns, and the fourth choice is the Nuggets. Like, if you don't like the Warriors in this, like, I don't like any of those three teams, especially with like Ayton being, and obviously we've talked about like the general whole that is Chris Paul and his sort of, longevity in a short term, in a playoff type situation. Like, who's the team that I'm supposed to like in that second, third, and fourth group? And like, okay, I would be more interested in like the Mavericks, right? Because they did something last week that you kind of need to do in the NBA is they fleeced a team for a quality player that will actually help them. Now, who knows what's going to happen, beyond that and in the off season. Obviously they get Hardaway back and whatnot, but like, that's where I would sort of start there. And it's like, the problem is, or sort of the sort of red flag is like, there's three teams right below the Warriors and I don't like any of those. So I am feeling like, okay, I've got to pick like this team that's like way further down in order to talk myself into somebody other than the Warriors.
I mean, I just think it's there's too many things that went the Warriors' way for them to get to this NBA Finals and win. Credit to them for doing that, and they won. Yeah, but it's still looking at almost next year.
It's almost Nuggets still working. Like
they won the championship. It worked.
No, I know, but I mean, like it's like looking at these teams that are as currently constructed for next season, like. That it might be extending into next year, and that you go and you're like, okay, like in theory we're supposed to be afraid of LeBron and Anthony Davis, but like, are we? Is like, what are they going to do beyond those two guys? And like, is that they weren't even really close to making the playoffs this year? Yeah. And like, if it sometimes it just works out where everybody else in the conference stinks, right? Or like there are no other good teams, and like the Warriors might have the same sort of path. Like, what's the difficult path for the Warriors going to be? I guess like, who are the teams that I'm supposed to be afraid of?
To me, I don't like the Suns as much. Like, I think I'll be interested to see what they end up getting for DeAndre Ayton, because I think that sign and trade is coming, and if they do a good job in that, which I don't know why another team would actually help them in terms of like giving them good players when like, what's your option here? You have to get rid of this guy. Yeah. But I look at the Nuggets and I think if they come back and they're healthy with that roster at full strength with Jamal Murray, and I mean, I'm not going to really bank on Michael Porter Jr. because I think he's going to be continually injured, but Jokic just needed somebody else, right? And I think we saw that team with Aaron Gordon and Jokic and Jamal Murray, and that was a team that looked really, really, really good. I think the Memphis Grizzlies getting some experience in the NBA playoffs, I think they're going to come back next year and be really, really good after a second half of the season where they were so good and had a really good run and found themselves, found their depth, found like their kind of like who they are, for lack of a better term. Sure. I think that's going to continue into next season. You mentioned Luka and the Mavs making moves, and Christian Wood. They just need more good players. There's other dudes stuff and they could count on. And so that's a big time move, I think, for them. Can we really be banking on Paul George and Kawhi being healthy for a full season? I don't know, but you're telling me that they're there to start the season. I'm going to go with them until one of them gets hurt. And I just think the path for the Warriors is just very, very difficult. Like all of that is tough. Remember, last season, Draymond was out, missed a whole chunk of time. Steph Curry was out, missed a whole chunk of time. Like, are they going to be healthy enough to survive the regular season, to get better seeding, to be able to get through those teams? Are the Rooks going to be ready? Like, can Moody and those guys be ready to actually contribute and carry the load in the regular season, right? And they got a bunch of guys, right? You're talking about Poole, you're talking about Moody, Kuminga, like this was great experience for those guys. So that's going to be really interesting to see. I just wonder, this ring and championship for Steph and Draymond, that's really big for them. Right? Like Draymond, when they're asking him, oh, what did you learn about yourself? And he's like, nothing. I knew I could do this. Like, yeah, that's a bravado talking. But when they were taking L's, when they were ducking the smoke because Klay Thompson was hurt and they were faking injuries to tank, did they really think they were going to get back here? I don't know. Steph was very vulnerable and honest, and Klay even, right? Like they were like, I didn't know if we would actually get back here. And that is an incredible thing. And to get to those heights, you saw the emotion from Steph Curry after that ended. Can you build back up to climb that mountain again, as it's going to be more difficult on your body? Right? Like the mileage keeps going up and up and up. And is the will going to be like, I don't know.
It's funny though, right? Like we talked about the mileage. I talked about the mileage and how, we came into this playoffs going like, I want the Warriors early and not so much late, because I'm not positive these guys cannot break down, but they didn't. And then you go, oh yeah, that's right. Because, in a weird way, as much as like, it was probably not all that fun for Klay having to rehab those injuries, like he still didn't have the wear and tear from a game to game standpoint. You mentioned Draymond and stuff like missing time. Like they missed all that time. They finished third in the West. Right. And like the Suns, I don't think are going to be the team that next year that they were again this year. And like, I don't expect those guys to play 82 games on the Warriors, but like, I feel like third place is probably the absolute lowest the Warriors are going to finish in the West next season, right? And so then you end up getting sort of an easier matchup in the first round, where the path, instead of just dealing with Jokic in that first round, now the path is probably some like, play-in team that, who knows, maybe it's the Lakers or something like that, but like, the path actually could be easier or just as easy in just a different form, at least for that first game. And then you get into, a second and third round. And obviously we have no idea what's sort of, possible here. Right. But we see all of these other teams, we're kind of hoping for a best case scenario, right? Where it's like, okay, but like really what have the Nuggets ever kind of done here? And like, you're asking Jamal Murray to come off of an injury that we just watched Klay come off of. And by the way, Klay, like getting another like actual healthy offseason where he gets to rest and actually, train and not sort of be working, pushing the rock up the hill, so to speak here. Like, every sport, the guy's always better the second year, from ACL. So like, I don't think he's done. I think it was just like, man, this guy's trying to play NBA finals games, still within a year off of kind of coming back. And, you mentioned those other guys that like, there's obviously a ton of talent on the bench there for the Warriors. Now, again, I don't know how many of these guys that are playing now they're going to be able to keep, right? Because Poole's looking for money and like some of these other, it looks like, Looney's gone, but you and I have talked before about how like that position and the Warriors, like the Kayvon Looney position, we were just throwing out random names.
We're supposed to have Wiseman, right? They're supposed to have Wiseman in that role. So we'll see how that works out.
Yeah. And so I just think like there's still a lot of upside with the Warriors. Now, again, that price at +5, +600, like, no, I'm not tripping over myself to bet that number now. But again, like, as I look down the board, like the Clippers is the second choice. Like, hold on. In your terms, miss me with that, man. Like, I'm not doing Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, like Kawhi Leonard off of like a year and a half layoff. Like, you know what I mean? All of a sudden, like Jamal Murray and Kawhi Leonard, like coming back, we just assume they're going to be 100%. And we're knocking Klay Thompson for coming back and not being 100%. It's like, well, like, I think we have to treat those as the same sort of deal, right? Like neither of those players are going to come back 100% or to the degree where I'm going to all of a sudden sell myself into like, the rest of that team, because honestly, the rest of those guys on both of those teams are just frankly not very good.
We'll get back to the pod in a sec, but first, be a pro and win. Introducing DRF Sports' all-new premium data feature on drf.com/sports. For $99 a year, which is just $8.25 a month, you can get industry-leading betting trends, angles, and analytics. With so many big sporting events here, it's the best way for you to make some money this postseason and have fun while doing it. That's DRF Sports Pro. Sign up now at drf.com/sports. Yeah, I'm very interesting to see how interesting things are in terms of what the Warriors team looks like next year, right? Like Wiggins is heading into the final year of his deal. Do you trade him for some cap relief because they're in cap like craziness right now, and Poole's got to get a new deal at some point. You'd assume you got to re-sign him. And now we just had a week and a half where we're being told that Andrew Wiggins was the second best player on the Golden State Warriors. So now am I banking on Andrew Wiggins for all of next season to be the second best player on the Warriors and lead them to the promised land for a full season? I feel like I know better than that, right? Like it was good for like a couple weeks, but he's supposed to be their fourth guy. So can things fall into place again to where, you know, you get back to this position where you don't need Andrew Wiggins to be great for a full season or a full playoff run. Give us spurts, right? And that there's so many other things that need to fall into place for that to happen. But again, I will say the league is better when the Warriors are good. It's a good talking point. It's good storylines. Draymond's out here talking the most amount of trash for a guy who fouled out of 3 NBA Finals games and had a bunch of triple singles, but he put up 12 and 12 in a game 6. And now, and my guy's posting like the stat, you know, those stat IG posts. And it's like, really? Like you're out here like sharing all that as if like you dropped 50, like you're Giannis, you dropped like 50-point triple-double in the NBA Finals. He's like 12 and 12. Y'all were talking smack about me. Yeah. It's like, what? What are we doing? But it's entertaining. It's entertaining, and I love it all. The Warriors Invitational, yes, continues for another year, to quote the wise words of said Draymond Green. But yeah, tons of fun. The Celtics, same thing. I said it on last pod. Going into the East, and you look at it, the Heat are about to make a move, whether it's for Donovan Mitchell, whether it's for Bradley Beal. Something's about to go down there with the Miami Heat, because they obviously know that Jimmy can't stay healthy and their team can't stay healthy, and you can't really be relying on Kyle Lowry. So you need another move, and Pat Riley's getting old. He's not trying to sit around and wait.
No.
I don't know what's going to happen with the Brooklyn Nets, but you'd assume something's got to go down with the Brooklyn Nets. And again, they got Kevin Durant.
So, well, that's it, right? So, you know, again, you talk about how like both those teams sort of have to do something. The Nets are plus 650, the Heat are plus 1400, right? So you're getting twice, if you will, the value on the Heat. And if you're going to make a speculative bet, right, like the Heat at plus 1400, 14-1 certainly seem like the better play in the East, because it's funny when you go down the board here. Once you get, you know, you have obviously Boston, Brooklyn, the Heat, and then the Sixers, your favorite team, at 15-1. Like then it's just you're getting peppered by teams in the West: Dallas, Memphis, LA, New Orleans, Utah, Minnesota, and then you finally get to Toronto at like 50-1, right? So like there's still clearly those 4 teams. Philly seems like it's like a stand pat situation, right? Like they're kind of handcuffed, if you will. Like I don't even know if it's a voluntary stand pat situation. And then obviously, you know, we talk about Boston, but like, so the other team, if you will, to me is either Brooklyn or Miami. And if you are going to make a bet on a futures market here as we go into the summertime, the only thing that you would bet on is something changing from now until the start of the season. And so it sounds to me like you think the one team that is most likely to have a significant upgrade change, certainly in the East, would be Miami. Is that fair to say?
Oh, yeah. And there's too many links between that. Like if we're already seeing the pictures of Donovan Mitchell hanging out with Jimmy Butler, it is kind of weird because Dwayne Wade obviously he was buddies with Jimmy Butler. That's how Jimmy Butler kind of ended up in Miami in the first place. And now Dwayne Wade, who's an owner of the Utah Jazz, is supposed to be like a a piece to like mentor young Donovan Mitchell. So is he mentoring him to stay in Utah, or is he telling him about what South Beach is like on a Tuesday night? Yeah. Right. So like there's so many just interesting pieces there. And I just think Miami's going to do something. You're not going to get that close and just, let this opportunity slip away because you couldn't decide whether to play Gabe Vincent or Kyle Lowry.
Right.
Like really break that down for a second, right? Like you're so close to the NBA finals and that's what was going down with you're relying on Victor Oladipo and like, come on. Yeah. So it'll be super interesting. Yeah. I like betting on the move there because Bradley Beal and Donovan Mitchell are two guys that something's got to give there. Rudy Gobert could also be an interesting guy that if he ends up on the right team, like maybe that switches some things up, but we'll see. We'll see. NBA Finals, super exciting. Stanley Cup Final, also super exciting. And, we talked about it a lot. The Stanley Cup champs were underdogs, and a lot of people enjoyed, why wouldn't you bet on the Stanley Cup, back-to-back reigning Stanley Cup champs as underdogs? It makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And then the games start. It's like, oh, here we are. Here are the Colorado Avalanche. So what's been going on? What's talk to me here about what's happening?
Yeah. So just, speaking of avalanches, right? Just an absolute landslide in game 2, right? And so we talked in game 1, going into game 1, about the idea that like, we know what we're going to get from both of these teams, right? Like there isn't sort of a bipolar nature in the way that like the Oilers played, or even though like, honestly, the Rangers played. The Oilers, because of obviously how good Connor McDavid was and how he drives play at a sort of an unnatural way. And the Rangers with Shesterkin, how he sort of saves the day in an unnatural way, right? Whereas like you kind of get back to, okay, these two teams, like we know what we're going to get. And so that first game rolls around and it's 4-3 overtime game. And it's funny how like the narrative sort of changes, right? Because Colorado wins that game in overtime. And like, I heard a lot of people talking about how like, oh man, like Colorado needed to win that game. Like that felt like a game like they had to grab that first game. Because if they didn't, now you're down 1-0 to like Tampa Bay, defending champs. And like how, not how are you ever going to come back from that, but like, that's a really tough scene at that point. And then of course, after game 2, 7-0, Avs get the shutout and somehow the under doesn't cash. My under doesn't cash. Little annoyed by that. If you told me we were going to have a shutout, I probably would have doubled down on the under 6 going into that game. And of course they win 7-0. Kicking the extra point late in that one. And so now the narrative is like, oh man, sweep, like Tampa Bay's never seen anything like this Colorado team. And I'm like, blah, 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 blah. And like, I don't disagree with that because this Colorado team is better than Tampa Bay. Like we knew that going in. This isn't a surprise. It's why Colorado was the favorite. And obviously we had, the market itself had a discussion with itself about how much Colorado should be the favorite, right? And then opened like -200, -190 and got bet down to -160 for Colorado. And so like, obviously there was interest in Tampa Bay to, get that number bet down.
Yeah.
And so then you look at the metrics here. And so game 1, like, yes, the game was close 4-3, but the expected goals for at even strength, 2.66 to 1.22. The high danger chances at even strength, 13-8, right? And Tampa ends up scoring 2 out of 8 on those high danger chances. Colorado scores only 2 out of 13 on those high danger chances. So all of that, throw that into the mix and you come up with, in my numbers, about a 65% chance that Colorado wins that game. Now it goes to overtime, so it feels a lot more like 50-50, but a 65% chance to win a game is about -190 on a implied money line. So, okay, like that sounds about right? It seems like they had the correct number the whole time, maybe not for the game, but at least for the series. So game 2 rolls around. Of course, the number gets adjusted. You don't have this price discovery. So like, when Tampa beats New York, right, the price opens up almost immediately after that game. And you have 4 days to kind of work, what is called price discovery, work the number down. If, people are betting Tampa Bay, could have gone the other way if people were betting Colorado. And now we know what the number should be. And then game 2 rolls around. There isn't that price discovery. You don't get a chance to bet on Tampa Bay at, plus 160 or anything like that, because we've already gone through that price discovery situation. And then Colorado absolutely houses them 7-0. But the interesting thing here is the even strength numbers. Now, I'm not going to tell you that Tampa Bay was, they were actually the better team. No, it was actually a way more low event game, which is, again, when you're betting the under, that's what you're betting on. 1.52 expected goals for at even strength for Colorado and 0.35 for Tampa Bay. 7 high danger scoring chances at even strength for Colorado. Okay. Not much, right? But 1 for Tampa Bay in the entire game. So it was a domination, not because Colorado is like an offensive juggernaut and just created chance after chance after chance at even strength. Now, power play, obviously they get the early goal there. They get a late power play goal. They get a shorthanded goal, right? And the non-even strength stuff starts to pile up, especially on the scoreboard. But you're not relying game to game on 2 power play goals. You're not relying game to game on a shorthanded goal. You're only relying on what you can do at even strength. And so this was a blowout, not because Colorado was that much, I shouldn't say that much better, because they certainly were much better. They weren't that offensive 5-on-5. They took advantage of the special teams, and they frankly took advantage of Andrei Vasilevsky, who was minus 4.16 in goals saved above expectation. Remember, you and I were making fun of Mike Smith for being minus 6.5 over the course of 4 games. Like, that was appalling to us that he was minus 6.5 for a 4-game stretch.
Yeah.
Vasilevsky's like gone full Mike Smith and then some in that game, going minus 4.16 in just 1 game. Mm-hmm. And so you go, okay, like, he's not making any saves. He was the expectation, of course, is that one of the great goaltenders of this generation was going to make a few saves. And that's funny. He makes a couple of, 10 bell stops that, like, you go, oh yeah, look, Vasilevsky's like still here. And it's because he makes a great glove save on a breakaway, or a couple other, blocker saves on a breakaway. It's like, yeah, but he's got to stop the other ones too.
Yeah.
And what we know about Vasilevsky is, as a series goes on, he does get better as a series goes on. I saw a stat, somebody finally woke up to this. We sort of knew it tangentially, but somebody finally woke up to this and put out his game 1 of a series stats versus 2 through 7. And it was obviously in stark contrast. You don't need those numbers. You don't need to read those numbers off by heart to know, just by watching Tampa Bay over the last 3 years, to know that early on in these series, like, they work their way, or he works his way into these series. Now, the problem is you're down 2-0 to Colorado. And like, that's a problem, because again, Colorado, for the first time, a matchup here, Colorado is the better team. Now, people will say like, hey, like, Tampa Bay was underdogs to Toronto. It's like, well, they weren't really. That was a pick'em series.
Yeah.
That maybe Toronto was like minus 120, minus 130, but they had home ice advantage, right? And so if that was played like a Super Bowl where it's on a neutral ice, Tampa Bay would have been the favorite, but you have to account for home ice advantage.
Yeah.
Similar goes to Florida. Now, Florida had the best season, of anybody this year. Obviously racked up all the points, President's Trophy. Like, of course they were going to be the favorite, given that they also had home ice advantage. Like, this isn't a situation where Tampa Bay was notably worse than any team that they've played up until this point, but they are not as good as Colorado. And so we now shift to game 3 here. And you've got this obviously narrative concept of, okay, so are things going to change here for Tampa? And the price right now is pick'em, and that's absolutely a bet on Tampa that I would have made before this series started, because my valuation there was kind of anything minus 120 or better. So you're getting minus 110. Again, we have some price discovery elements here because we get to wait and see, obviously day and a half here. Are the prices moving? Are people piling in on Colorado? They might be, but the price is not moving in that direction, at least just yet, right? So if it opens minus 110 on either side, then okay, if Colorado moves to minus 120, minus 130, like, that's obviously a sign that Colorado is getting bet heavily. They might still be getting bet heavily because of that last performance. But if the price isn't going to move, doesn't this feel like that NFL game where everyone's on the road favorite -3 on a Thursday night? And it's like, yeah, but the line's not moving here, right? Like, odds makers are holding steady when it comes to this, right? So, and then the other element of like the narrative thing is, like, if Tampa Bay is going to win a game in this series, it's going to be game 3. And if we're judging how they played in game 2 by what we're supposed to see in game 3 or game 4, I think that's a mistake, right? Like, flip the order of these games. Think about how different this would be if Colorado had won the first game 7-0, and then the next game had gone to overtime. We'd be talking about how, Tampa Bay was just tired after the Rangers series. We'd be, coming up with different reasons. We'd cite Vasilevsky and his game 1 struggles. And then we'd be like, okay, now they've got their footing in game 2, and that game went to overtime, and it sucks that they lost, but like now the scene shifts to Tampa and they have a chance to win this game. Right. And like, yes, the order isn't that. The order is a 7-0 loss in game 2, but like, there was still just 2 games within 3 days of each other. Like, this isn't some like random tectonic shift of, the Lightning lost half their players or anything like that. It's like, it's still all the same players on the ice. Plus you get this element of Tampa just having that stick in their craw, right? Just sitting there watching and losing a 7-0 game. Like, historically speaking, when a team gets blown out like that, and I'll take all sports, but certainly in hockey, especially if they're returning home, that's a really good time to bet on, in this case, the Tampa Bay Lightning. And so I'm waiting to see if the price gets to an even money. That would be great. Plus 100, certainly a bet. Even minus 110, if it doesn't get that far, honestly, I just think you wait right up until puck drop, and then you make a bet on the Tampa Bay Lightning in this game. Again, we talked about the chances in this game in game 2, and wanting, we've talked about this at length over the course of over the playoffs. When the Lightning are controlling play, i.e., sort of winning hockey games, they do so in a under circumstance, right? In a low event circumstance. So it's interesting, 7 goals in the first game, 7 goals in the second game, but the under is actually taken money. And so you could get the under at minus 105, minus 110 in those first 2 games. And even though the first 2 games went over, now that we go to Tampa Bay, the under is at minus 120, which I think tells you all you need to know about the underlying metrics and what people are betting on here. So I think the under, it's a back to the well situation on the under 6, right? And so we know those things often come hand in hand. We talked about this in the Tampa series, especially after game 1, that honestly, if you could parlay Tampa and the under, you probably should just do it. I didn't follow my own advice, but of course, for the last 4 games, that ended up cashing that, that sort of single game parlay, if you will, Tampa and the under. I think Tampa and or the under, I think, is the play again here in game 3. And honestly, if that's it, that's a wrap. Okay, then, we live on. The good news is in our back pocket, and, hopefully we can win this Tampa one and win the bet that I'm about to mention. We've got the Cale Makar plus 450 Conn Smythe. He scores 2 goals. They were late in the game. It's not like they were an overtime winner or anything like that, but that's still going to go on his record, if you will, as having 2 goals already in the Stanley Cup Final. I imagine he probably adds to that going forward. He's now minus 175 to win the Conn Smythe. And of course, his next closest competitor, if you will, Nathan MacKinnon, he's gone the other way. He's now plus 500. Frankly, if you wanted to, you could probably just bet on MacKinnon right now and secure a plus 500 and a plus 475 and go forward. That's not really my style. We're sitting here with a plus 450 ticket on a guy who's minus 175 right now and whose team is the better team and has the 2-0 lead in this series. I mean, I can't do any better than that, right? Outside of when this actually, if, knock on wood, this actually cashes, you honestly can't do much better than grabbing Makar at plus 450 and have him sit here at minus 175 with theoretically 2 games to go, at least 2 wins for Colorado left in this series. So, I'm worried, obviously about the idea of the length of this series after, a lot like Boston and the Brooklyn, right? That first game, we were all signing up for 7 games of this. After game 1, we were signing up for 7 games of Tampa Bay, Colorado. Now we get this blowout and you start worrying about it going to a sweep, but that's human nature. That's natural. I think Tampa gets the win on Monday night, and we hopefully maybe see this get to 6 or 7 games, though I could see this maybe ending in 5. But again, that's the human nature of it, and going like, oh man, like it's hard to back Tampa Bay after what you saw in game 2, but this team is obviously better than that. And I think that there's some value on them here in game 3.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it's just been, you can't see them going down easy, right? Like there's nothing to show us that they're just going to kind of roll over and give up. And, you know, I mean, I did see the clips of Corey Perry on some dude's ankle.
Not a great look. Not a great look, Corey. Not cool, man. No, not cool. Desperation. Don't love it.
But yes, good look though has been on this podcast, and I know that there's a lot going on here with the Stanley Cup Final still to be decided. But until the next time we discuss said things, where can the people find you, my dude?
Yeah, at mrussauthentic on Twitter. You probably already follow me. Hopefully you do. If you don't, hop on there. And on Friday's episode, how do you feel about a little mailbag type episode? Anybody who wants to ask us a question, sports betting, frankly, anything, life, if you want, sports betting, you know, a specific sport, something in general, any question that you sort of wonder, maybe something that you've listened to and you sort of have a question about, you know, like what are we doing with the shot quality stuff? What does the expected goal stuff mean when it comes to hockey? You know, how are we handicapping football? You know, talk about, you know, your favorite team. What do we think of that? Something along those lines. Because the last episode on Friday of the season, and we'll have some show news on Friday as well that you'll want to tune into in that department. But hit us up with a question. Shoot me a DM. Shoot Sheldon a DM. Even shoot the DRF Sports a DM, shoot them a DM, and we'll gather that all up for Friday's episode. Because like I said, your guy's on vacation, headed off to Boston here in a couple of hours. Thought I was going to walk, but at one point thought we were walking right into some sort of parade type situation. Doesn't appear to be the circumstance there. But a week after, they were the golf center of the universe and sort of half of the NBA center of the universe. I imagine a considerably toned down city that I'm walking into. But yeah, I'll be back on Friday. And then of course, everything that I write over at the Score, hop on to the app there, the betting side of things, set your alerts. Everything comes directly to your phone. So you're on top of things when something like Matthew Fitzpatrick at 20-1 comes directly to your phone on Friday night. And you had all the opportunity in the world to back him, Scheffler, and also Brooks Koepka along the way and cash a nice ticket with Matthew Fitzpatrick yesterday.
Yeah, I love it, my dude. And of course, we'll be back to discuss, as mentioned, on Friday, all that and more. Thanks again, man. Appreciate you. We'll catch up again down the line.
Thanks, pal. Appreciate it.
Then if you want to follow me online, you can do so on Instagram at Sheldon Alexander and on Twitter at Shell Alexander. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the DRF Sports Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Also rate us, review us, like us, all that other fun stuff. But for more from this new project from DRF Sports, just a little reminder, if you're unfamiliar with the letters DRF, it stands for Daily Racing Forum, which has been around for over 100 years, giving you all of the horse racing information, data, and analysis. But now we've taken over the entire sports world. So if you want coverage on every football game, as well as the NBA, MLB, college sports, and more, head to drf.com/sports for all of the details and insights, as the site has all of the data on every game, including offensive and defensive stats, betting angles, line movements, key injuries, team stats, and more. The DRF data is what powers our power trends. So if you want to see which trends our analysts have selected, follow us on Instagram and on Twitter. If you want access to all of the raw data, drf.com/sports. That's where you can find the usual previews as we deep dive into the games. Of course, we got you covered on this podcast. However you want your betting information, we've got you covered. Again, my name is Sheldon Alexander. That's all I got for now. But until next time, see ya.
Thanks for listening to the DRF Sports Podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show. For more sports betting advice, go to drf.com/sports and follow on Twitter at DRF_sports.